The black volcanic peaks of Mount Tarsus loomed over the small settlement of Havenvale, casting long shadows across the human colony that had taken root on this alien world just 3 generations ago. The mountain's jagged silhouette against the twin moons was a constant reminder of what dwelled within its cavernous depths, the last of the Draconians, a species the humans had learned to fear since their arrival on Proxima b. Eli Harker stood at the edge of the settlement's boundary fence, his thin 13-year-old frame silhouetted against the purplish evening sky. His dark hair whipped around his face in the wind as he stared at the mountain with a mixture of terror and resignation. Tomorrow at dawn, the elders would take him to the offering stone, dress him in ceremonial robes, and leave him there, a sacrifice to appease the great beast. "You shouldn't be out here alone," came a voice from behind him. Eli didn't need to turn to recognize his mother's voice, cracked with emotion and exhaustion from hours of futile pleading with the council. "I wanted to see it one last time," Eli replied, his eyes never leaving the mountain. "To understand." His mother, Lyra, stepped beside him, her hand finding his shoulder. The ceremonial selection had been performed that morning, 12 smooth stones and 1 black stone placed in the ancient bowl. Eli had drawn the black stone, sealing his fate as this year's offering. No one had expected a child of a council member to be chosen. Some whispered it was rigged, a political move against his mother who had argued for years that the sacrifices were unnecessary. "I'll find a way to stop this," Lyra whispered fiercely, though they both knew the colony's laws were absolute. The treaty with the Draconian had kept peace for 40 years. 1 human life annually in exchange for protection from the other predatory species that roamed the planet's wilderness. Eli turned to his mother, his young face hardened with a resolve that no child should have to muster. "I've accepted it," he said simply. "Like grandfather taught me, face the inevitable with dignity." That night, as the settlement slept under the eerie glow of the twin moons, Eli sat cross-legged on his bed, meticulously packing a small bag. The elders had said no possessions were allowed in the sacrifice, but Eli had no intention of arriving empty-handed. Into his bag went his grandfather's worn copy of Human History Among the Stars, a small multi-tool he'd received on his 10th birthday, a solar-powered flashlight, and the translator device his mother had developed, a technology that had earned her position on the council. A soft knock at his door made him hastily shove the bag under his blanket. His father entered, his tall frame stooped with grief. "I thought you might be awake," Thomas Harker said, sitting beside his son. Unlike Eli's mother who had fought until the last moment, his father had retreated into a quiet resignation that somehow hurt even more. "Dad," Eli said, his voice stronger than he felt, "what do you know about the Draconian? No one ever talks about what happens to the offerings." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Not much. The first colonists encountered it shortly after landing. It was devastating. Nearly wiped out half the initial settlement before the first council negotiated the treaty. All we know is that it's ancient, intelligent, and powerful beyond our understanding." "Do you think it eats the sacrifices?" Eli asked, the bluntness of youth cutting through the euphemisms adults had constructed around the ritual. His father flinched. "I don't know, son. No one's ever returned to tell us." Eli nodded, processing this. "I'm not afraid," he lied, wanting to offer his father some comfort. Thomas pulled his son into a fierce embrace. "You should be," he whispered. "Being afraid keeps you sharp. But being brave means facing that fear." He pressed something into Eli's palm, a small communicator, illegal for a sacrifice to possess. "Your mother doesn't know I'm giving you this. It probably won't work inside the mountain, but..." Eli closed his fingers around it, understanding the gift for what it was, a desperate hope. Dawn came too quickly. The entire settlement gathered at the central square as the 6 elders collected Eli from his home. His mother stood rigidly, her face a mask of controlled fury, while his father could not meet his eyes. The ceremonial robes, white with intricate blue patterns representing the colony's history, felt heavy on Eli's shoulders as they led him through the crowd. No one spoke as they walked the ancient path to the offering stone, a flat ceremonial platform at the base of the mountain. Tradition dictated that the elders would leave him there and return to the settlement. What happened afterward was between the sacrifice and the Draconian. "The treaty must be honored," intoned Elder Quan, the oldest of the council, as they reached the stone. As it has been since our forebears first settled this world. One life freely given ensures the many survive. Eli wanted to point out that there was nothing freely given about his situation, but he held his tongue. His small bag was hidden beneath the robes, strapped to his back, a small act of rebellion. May your sacrifice bring another year of peace, Elder Voss added, placing a ceremonial wreath of local flora around Eli's neck. The sweet scent made him slightly dizzy, perhaps by design, he thought cynically. One by one, the elders turned and walked away, leaving Eli alone on the stone platform. Only Elder Quan paused, looking back with what might have been regret in his ancient eyes, before he too disappeared down the path. Eli stood perfectly still until the elders were out of sight. Then he sat down on the cold stone, cross-legged, and waited. The morning sun climbed higher, beating down on him through the thin atmosphere. Hours passed. His throat grew parched, but he'd anticipated this and brought water in his hidden bag. As the sun began its descent, Eli wondered if perhaps the Draconian wouldn't come. Maybe it had died, and years of sacrifices had been for nothing. Just as this hope began to take root, the ground beneath him trembled. A low rumble emanated from somewhere within the mountain, growing louder until it seemed to vibrate through Eli's bones. The stone beneath him shuddered, and a section of the mountainside that had appeared solid began to shift, revealing a massive opening that had been perfectly concealed. And then it emerged. The Draconian was nothing like the crude depictions in the settlement's historical archives. It was massive, easily the size of 3 colony transports placed end to end. Its scales shifted color like oil on water, iridescent in the fading light. 6 limbs, 4 legs ending in clawed appendages, and 2 smaller, more dexterous arms, supported its serpentine body. But it was the head that transfixed Eli, elongated and elegant, with 3 pairs of eyes arranged vertically, glowing with an inner light that seemed to pierce straight through him. Eli stood, his legs trembling but refusing to run. The creature lowered its massive head until it was level with the platform, regarding him with those unnerving eyes. This close, Eli could see that what had appeared to be scales were actually thousands of tiny interlocking plates, each inscribed with symbols he couldn't comprehend. He expected to die immediately, crushed or incinerated or whatever method this apex predator preferred. Instead, the Draconian spoke, its voice resonating not through the air, but seemingly directly inside Eli's mind. Another child, it said, the mental voice carrying a weight of what sounded like disappointment. They send me their young now. How far they have fallen. Eli swallowed hard, his hand instinctively moving toward the translator in his bag, though he realized he didn't need it. The Draconian was communicating in a way that transcended language. I'm Eli Harker, he said, his voice small but steady. I was chosen. The creature's head tilted slightly, a disturbingly human gesture of curiosity. Chosen, it repeated, the word carrying a ripple of what might have been amusement. Is that what they tell themselves now? That they choose which of their own to abandon to death? It's the treaty, Eli replied, confusion mixing with his fear. One life for the protection of the colony. It's been this way for 40 years. All 6 eyes blinked in unison, and the massive head drew back slightly. 40 years, it mused. A mere moment. And in that moment, they have forgotten the truth. Eli took a tentative step forward, curiosity momentarily overriding his terror. What truth? Instead of answering, the Draconian lowered its body further, one massive clawed appendage extending toward the platform. Come, human child. Night approaches, and the predators of this world do not honor your colony's treaty. Eli hesitated, looking back toward the path to the settlement, his home, his parents, everything he had ever known. I will not harm you, the creature added, a note of what almost sounded like gentleness in its mental voice. Had that been my intention, you would already be dead. The logic was undeniable. Steeling himself, Eli stepped onto the offered limb, which curled slightly to form a secure platform beneath his feet. The Draconian raised him with surprising gentleness and turned back toward the mountain opening. Hold fast, it instructed, and Eli gripped one of the plate-like scales as they moved into the darkness. The passage was massive, clearly shaped for the Draconian's bulk. As they progressed deeper, Bioluminescent formations began to appear along the walls, bathing everything in a soft blue glow. The air grew warmer, with a faint metallic scent that reminded Eli of the colony's hydroponics bay. They emerged into a cavern so vast that Eli couldn't see its boundaries. The ceiling soared hundreds of meters above, studded with more of the glowing formations that mimicked a starry sky. The floor was smooth and appeared almost polished, with intricate patterns etched into the surface that pulsed with light as the Draconian moved across them. But what truly stole Eli's breath were the structures. Rising throughout the cavern were buildings, or what his human mind interpreted as buildings, constructed of the same iridescent material as the Draconian scales. They twisted and spiraled in ways that seemed to defy structural logic, connected by graceful arches and suspended pathways. "You live here? Alone?" Eli couldn't help asking as he took in the scale of what could only be described as a city. The Draconian set him down gently on a raised platform near the center of the cavern. "Now, yes," it replied, and Eli felt a wave of something ancient and sorrowful emanate from the creature. "Once, this was but one district of Kael'var, the last great city of my kind. What happened to the others?" Eli asked, turning in a slow circle to take in the alien splendor around him. "They left," the Draconian said simply. "When the cataclysm came, most fled to the stars. Others chose final sleep. I remained as guardian." Eli's mind raced with questions, but the Draconian continued before he could voice them. "You are hungry," it stated rather than asked. "Come." It led him to one of the smaller structures, where to Eli's astonishment, he found what appeared to be a prepared space, with furnishings that, while alien in design, were clearly sized for a human occupant. "You were expecting me," Eli said, the realization dawning. "You prepared for a human visitor." "I prepare for each offering," the Draconian replied, "though few have shown the composure you display." On what approximated a table, Eli found containers of what appeared to be food and water. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since the previous night. "It is safe for your physiology," the Draconian assured him. "I have studied your kind extensively." Eli approached the offerings cautiously. The food looked like the nutrient cubes from the colony's rations, though slightly different in color. He took a small bite and was surprised by the pleasant, fruity flavor. "Thank you," he said automatically, his colony's emphasis on manners asserting itself even in this bizarre situation. The Draconian settled its massive form around the structure, peering in through an opening that seemed designed for exactly that purpose. "You may rest here. We will speak more when you have recovered from your journey." Eli nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion that had crept up on him. The emotional toll of the day, combined with hours spent waiting in the sun, had drained him completely. "Before you go," he said, fighting to keep his eyes open, "may I know what to call you?" The Draconian was silent for a long moment, and Eli feared he had somehow offended it. Then, the mental voice returned, softer than before. "I have been called many things by your kind. Monster, demon, destroyer." There was a pause. "But you may call me Thalasser, last guardian of Kael'var." Eli nodded, the strange name echoing in his mind. "Good night, Thalasser." As his eyes closed, he thought he heard the mental equivalent of a chuckle. "Sleep well, young prince." The words barely registered as exhaustion claimed him. Eli woke to the soft pulsing of the bioluminescent lights. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The curved walls and strange materials were nothing like his bedroom in the colony. Then the events of the previous day crashed back into his consciousness, and he sat up with a gasp. He was still alive. The Draconian, Thalasser, hadn't devoured him in his sleep. Looking around, Eli saw that fresh food and water had been placed nearby, but there was no sign of his host. After eating and using what appeared to be designed as human-compatible washing facilities, Eli ventured outside the structure. The vast cavern was as impressive in his rested state as it had been through exhausted eyes. He walked along the smooth floor, marveling at how the patterns shifted and glowed beneath his feet. "You explore with confidence," came Thalasser's mental voice, though the Draconian was nowhere in sight. "Most offerings cower and weep for days." Eli turned in a circle, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Where are you?" "Attending to matters elsewhere in the city," came the reply. "But I am aware of all that occurs within Kael'var. Tell me, young prince, why do you not fear me as the others did?" The question gave Eli pause. Why wasn't he paralyzed with terror? I, I do fear you, he admitted. But I'm also curious. And you haven't hurt me when you easily could have. There was that mental equivalent of a chuckle again. Honesty. Refreshing. Continue your exploration if you wish. I will join you shortly. Perhaps you might find your way to the Hall of Memories. Follow the path that glows brightest beneath your feet. Intrigued, Eli looked down and noticed that certain lines in the floor pattern were indeed pulsing more brightly than others. He followed them through the twisting pathways of the underground city, past structures of increasingly elaborate design, until he reached what appeared to be an entrance to a larger structure. The moment he stepped inside, the walls came alive with light. Projections, or something like them, appeared in the air around him, three-dimensional images of beings similar to Thalasser, though with variations in size, coloration, and features. It was like walking through a forest of ghosts. The last recorded images of my kind on this world, said Thalasser, and this time the voice was accompanied by the creature itself, entering through an opening so large that Eli hadn't recognized it as a doorway. Before the exodus, Eli walked among the images, studying the alien faces. Despite their reptilian appearance, he could read expressions in their multi-eyed gazes: sorrow, determination, fear. They were leaving, he said, understanding dawning. This is a record of their departure. But why? What was the cataclysm you mentioned? Thalasser moved deeper into the hall, and the images shifted around them, now showing scenes of devastation. Mountains collapsing, oceans boiling, skies filled with ash. This world was not always as you see it now, Thalasser explained. Once, it teemed with life and beauty beyond your imagination. My kind had dwelled here for 1,000,000 of your years, building our civilization in harmony with the planet. The images shifted again, now showing a massive object approaching from space, a comet or asteroid of immense proportions. We saw it coming centuries in advance, Thalasser continued. We prepared. Most chose to leave, to seek new worlds. Some stayed to attempt the Great Shielding, a foolish endeavor that claimed many lives, but ultimately saved the planet from total destruction. Eli watched, transfixed, as the images showed the impact and its aftermath, a world transformed by catastrophe, yet somehow surviving. Those who remained after the shielding entered the long sleep, with guardians appointed to watch over each of the great cities until the world healed. Thalasser's mental voice grew softer. I am the last guardian still awake. The others, their charges have ended in various ways over the millennia. How long ago was this? Eli asked, trying to comprehend the timescale. By your measurements, approximately 50,000 years, Thalasser replied casually. Eli gasped. You've been alone for 50,000 years? Not continuously, Thalasser said. I too entered the long sleep, awakening periodically to assess the world's recovery. It was during one such awakening, 40 of your years ago, that I first encountered your kind. The images around them changed again, showing humans in the older-style environmental suits of the first colony ships. Eli recognized the landscape around Mount Tarsus, though it looked different. The vegetation was sparser, the terrain more rugged. They attacked you, Eli said, not a question but a realization as the images showed confrontations between the massive Draconian and the human colonists. They were afraid, Thalasser corrected, as all species are when encountering the unknown. They had weapons that could harm even one such as me. After the initial misunderstandings, their leaders sought parley. Now Eli saw images of humans approaching with hands raised in what was clearly intended as a peaceful gesture. One stepped forward, a tall woman with features that reminded Eli of Elder Quan. The First Council, Eli murmured. They negotiated the treaty. Thalasser's massive head swung toward him, all 6 eyes focusing intently. Is that what you believe? That your ancestors negotiated a treaty demanding human sacrifice? Eli blinked in confusion. That's what we're taught. 1 life each year in exchange for protection. A rumbling sound emanated from Thalasser's chest, an actual vocalization that Eli realized was laughter. Oh, young prince, how history becomes distorted in such a short time. Before Eli could ask what he meant, the images shifted again, showing the same human leader in conversation with Thalasser. The actual agreement, Thalasser explained, was an exchange of knowledge. Each year, your colony was to send one of their brightest minds, a scholar, a scientist, an innovator, to spend time in Kael'var, learning from the archives of my civilization. In return, I would use my abilities to keep the more dangerous predators of this recovering world away from your settlement. Eli stared in disbelief. But then why do they send people to be sacrificed? Why does no one ever return? Thalasser's mental voice darkened. The first 3 emissaries returned to your colony with knowledge and gifts. But the fourth, she discovered something in the archives that frightened your leaders. Something about this world and its future that they found uncomfortable. Eli felt a chill run down his spine. What did she find? The truth that this world is still healing, Thalasser said. That the ecosystem is far more fragile than it appears. That certain activities your colony was planning, extensive mining operations, in particular, would trigger a cascade of environmental collapse that would render the planet uninhabitable within a few of your generations. The implications hit Eli like a physical blow. They didn't want to stop their plans, he whispered. So they what? Imprisoned the fourth emissary? Killed her. Worse, Thalasser replied grimly. They discredited her, claimed she had been corrupted by me, called her a traitor to humanity, and they changed the narrative, transformed the exchange of knowledge into a sacrifice to appease a monster. The images around them faded, leaving the hall dimmer. After that, they began sending those they wished to be rid of, dissenters, primarily, people who questioned the council's decisions. And eventually, they turned it into a lottery, making it seem random and fair, while ensuring certain names found their way into the selection more frequently than others. And the people they sent? Eli asked, dreading the answer. Some I managed to help escape this world via ancient technology still functioning in the deeper levels of Kael'var, Thalasser said. Others chose to remain here, living out their lives in the city. None have been alive for many years now. Eli sank to the floor, his mind reeling. Everything he had been taught, the foundation of his colony's most sacred tradition, was a lie. My mother, he said suddenly, looking up at Thalasser. She's been arguing against the sacrifices for years, saying they're unnecessary, that we should seek communication with you instead. That's why I was chosen, isn't it? To silence her. Thalasser lowered his massive head until it was level with Eli. I cannot know the minds of your leaders with certainty, but the pattern suggests your hypothesis is correct. Anger boiled up in Eli, hot and unfamiliar. They have to know the truth. Everyone does. We have to tell them. And how do you propose to do that, young prince? Thalasser asked, though his tone suggested he already knew what Eli would say. Eli stood, his small frame straight and determined. I need to go back. Thalasser regarded Eli with all 6 eyes, their luminescence shifting to a deeper blue. Returning would place you in considerable danger, the Draconians said. Your council has maintained this deception for generations. They will not welcome its exposure. Eli paced the gleaming floor, which rippled with light beneath his feet. But my parents, my mother, they deserve to know I'm alive. And the colony needs to understand what's really happening. He turned to face the massive creature. You said the planet is fragile. What happens if the colony continues its expansion? It's mining. Thalasser's massive form shifted, and the hall around them transformed. The projected images now showed the landscape around the human settlement, but altered, devastated. The lush purple vegetation was gone, replaced by barren ground. The sky had turned a sickly yellow, and what appeared to be violent storms raged across the horizon. The balance of this world is precarious, Thalasser explained. The cataclysm altered fundamental aspects of the ecosystem. My kind spent thousands of years stabilizing what remained before most departed. The mineral deposits your colony seeks to extract are not simply resources. They are part of the planetary regulation system my ancestors engineered. Eli watched as the simulation showed massive mining operations cutting into the mountainsides, followed by cascading environmental collapse. How long? He asked quietly. At current expansion rates, irreversible damage would begin within 20 of your years. Complete inhabitability within 60. Eli thought of the children in the colony, younger than himself. They would live to see their world die. We have to warn them. Even if they believe you, what alternative can you offer? Thalasser asked. Your colony came here seeking resources. Without mining, how will they sustain themselves? Eli's mind raced. There must be other ways. Sustainable methods. Maybe in your archives, There's knowledge about how your people lived here for thousands of years without destroying everything. Thalasser's head tilted in that curiously human gesture. You demonstrate wisdom beyond your years, young prince. Indeed, such knowledge exists. The massive creature rose to its full height. Come, before you decide your path, there is more you should see. Thalasser led Eli deeper into Kael'var, down spiraling pathways that descended further beneath the mountain. They eventually reached a circular chamber that hummed with energy. At its center stood what appeared to be a pool of liquid metal, its surface perfectly still despite the apparent impossibility of its existence. This is the heart of Kael'var, Thalasser explained. A repository of my people's collective knowledge, and a tool of remarkable capability. Eli approached cautiously, fascinated by the metallic pool that seemed to glow from within. What does it do? Many things. But most relevant to your situation, it can show truth. Not just images of the past, as you saw in the Hall of Memories, but direct experiences. It can also project one's consciousness across distance. Eli's eyes widened as he understood. I could contact my parents without physically returning to the colony. Indeed, Thalasser confirmed. Though there are limitations. The connection works best with minds that are receptive, those already questioning, those with emotional bonds to the communicator. My mother, Eli said immediately. She would listen. She's been fighting the council for years. And your father? Eli hesitated, thinking of his father's quiet resignation. He gave me a communicator before I left. It was forbidden. He must have known something was wrong with the sacrifice tradition. Thalasser made a sound that might have been approval. Then there is hope. But first, young prince, you must understand what you would be asking your people to believe. Place your hand upon the surface of the pool. Eli hesitated only briefly before reaching out. As his fingers touched the liquid metal, it remained solid beneath his touch, cool but not cold. Immediately, his mind exploded with sensation. He was simultaneously in the chamber with Thalasser and elsewhere, experiencing fragments of memories not his own. He saw the world as it had been before the cataclysm, breathtakingly beautiful, with vast forests of crystalline vegetation and oceans that glowed with bioluminescent life. He felt the terror as the Draconians watched the approaching destroyer from space, their desperate efforts to shield their world. He experienced the anguish of their decision to leave, and the determination of those who stayed to safeguard what remained. Then, more recently, he witnessed the arrival of humans from the perspective of Thalasser, the initial fear and hostility, followed by cautious communication. He saw the first emissaries learning in Kael'var, returning to the colony with knowledge that helped the settlement flourish. And then, most painfully, he experienced the betrayal. The fourth emissary's discovery of the environmental truth, the council's decision to silence her, and the gradual perversion of the exchange into a sacrifice. When Eli withdrew his hand, tears streamed down his face. They knew, he whispered. They've always known. Some knew. Thalasser corrected gently. Knowledge can be lost across generations, truths transformed into myths. Many in your colony now likely believe the lies they were taught. Eli wiped his tears with the back of his hand, his jaw set with newfound determination. Show me how to use the pool to contact my parents. And then I want to learn everything I can about how to save our world. Thalasser's eyes glowed with what Eli now recognized as approval. That is why I called you Prince, Eli Harker. Not for any bloodline, but for the nobility of spirit I sensed in you from our first meeting. Now listen carefully. Under Thalasser's guidance, Eli learned how to focus his thoughts into the pool, directing his consciousness towards specific individuals. That night, as the colony slept beneath the twin moons, Eli reached out to his mother. Lyra Harker sat alone in Eli's bedroom, clutching one of his shirts to her chest, her eyes red-rimmed from days of weeping. Since returning from the offering stone, she had barely spoken, barely eaten. Her husband worried she was slipping into a dangerous depression, but she couldn't bring herself to care. When Eli's presence first touched her mind, she thought she was hallucinating from grief and exhaustion. But the sensation was too vivid, too real. "Mom," came Eli's voice, clear as if he were standing beside her. "Mom, I'm alive." Lyra dropped the shirt, standing so quickly she knocked over the chair. "Eli," she whispered into the empty room, her heart racing. "Eli, where are you?" "I'm safe," his voice continued in her mind. I'm with Thalasser, the Draconian. Mom, everything we've been told about the sacrifices is a lie. Over the next hour, Eli shared everything he had learned. The true nature of the original agreement, the environmental truth the Council had suppressed, and the dire future that awaited the colony if nothing changed. Lyra listened, initially skeptical but gradually recognizing the ring of truth in her son's words. Your father needs to hear this, she said finally. And there are others, council members who might listen, who have questioned the traditions. Tomorrow night, Eli promised. Gather those you trust in our home. I'll reach out again. The connection faded, leaving Lyra standing in the empty room, her grief transformed into purpose. For the first time since Eli had been taken, she felt hope stirring within her chest. The following night, a small group gathered secretly in the Harker home. Lyra and Thomas, Elder Faye, who had always been sympathetic to Lyra's questioning of the sacrifice, Dr. Reyes, who had been researching unusual planetary phenomena, and Petra Chun, whose sister had been the fourth emissary, the one who discovered the truth and was discredited. When Eli's consciousness reached out through the heart of Kael'var, he found not just his mother waiting, but minds open and receptive to what he had to share. With Thalasser's help, he projected not just his voice, but images, showing them Kael'var, the archives, and most importantly, the environmental projections. The colony doesn't need to leave, Eli explained as the stunned group absorbed what they were seeing. But we need to change how we live here. Thalasser has shown me technologies the Draconians used, ways to harness energy without mining, to grow food more efficiently, to build without destroying. The Council will resist, Elder Faye warned. Too many have built their power on the current system, and the colony has been taught to fear the Draconian for generations. Then we need proof they can't deny, Thomas Harker said, speaking up for the first time. His eyes shone with pride for his son and determination. Eli, can you and Thalasser provide something tangible? Something beyond these mental communications that might be dismissed as grief-induced hallucinations. Through the connection, Eli conferred with Thalasser. There is a way, he said finally, but it will require courage from all of you. The plan they formed was audacious. 3 days later, at the colony's monthly assembly where the council addressed the settlement, Lyra Harker would publicly challenge the sacrifice tradition. She would reveal that her son was alive and that the entire ritual was based on a lie. Predictably, she would be dismissed as a grieving mother unable to accept reality. That would be when the second phase began. Thomas Harker, working with Dr. Reyes, had modified the colony's perimeter sensors to accept rather than repel a specific frequency, one that Thalasser could generate. At the precise moment when the council would be attempting to silence Lyra, the massive Draconian would approach the colony, not as a threat, but as a messenger of truth. And with him would be Eli, not a projection or a mental presence, but physically returned to stand before his people. The days leading up to the assembly were tense with preparation. Eli spent every waking hour absorbing knowledge from Kael'var's archives, learning about the Draconian technologies that could save his colony. Thalasser proved to be a patient teacher, seemingly impressed by the boy's quick mind and determined spirit. Your kind adapts rapidly, the ancient guardian observed as Eli mastered yet another concept. It is both your greatest strength and your greatest danger. What do you mean? Eli asked, looking up from the three-dimensional model of a sustainable energy system he'd been studying. You change to survive, which is admirable, Thalasser explained. But sometimes, you change without understanding the full consequences of your adaptations. You rush forward when patience might serve better. Eli considered this. Is that why the council hid the truth? Because they didn't want to adapt in a different way? Perhaps. Thalasser's mental voice carried a note of ancient sadness. Or perhaps they simply feared losing control. Power is a potent motivator across all sentient species. On the morning of the assembly, Eli stood at the entrance to Kael'var, looking out at the landscape that separated the mountain from the human settlement. In the distance, he could just make out the boundary fence, a thin line against the purplish vegetation. Are you certain of this path? Thalasser asked, joining him at the threshold. Once taken, it cannot be undone. Your life will never return to what it was. Eli nodded, his young face solemn. I'm sure. My people deserve the truth. And this world deserves a chance to heal. Then it is time, young prince, Thalasser said, lowering his massive body. The journey will be swift, but you must hold tightly. Eli climbed onto the offered limb, securing himself as he had learned to do over the past days. As Thalasser launched into motion, moving with surprising speed and grace despite his enormous size, Eli felt a complex mixture of emotions: fear at what awaited, determination to succeed, and a strange sense of privilege of being part of something so much larger than himself. They timed their arrival precisely. Through the heart of Kael'var, they had maintained contact with Lyra, who confirmed that the assembly had begun. The council members stood on the raised platform in the colony's central square, addressing the gathered populace about the past month's developments and future plans. Elder Quan had just finished a solemn acknowledgement of the necessary sacrifice that had ensured another year of safety when Lyra stepped forward from the crowd. The sacrifice was unnecessary. Her voice rang out, silencing the murmurs of the assembly. The entire tradition is based on a lie, and I can prove it. Security personnel moved toward her, but Thomas stepped to his wife's side, along with Elder Faye, creating a protective barrier. My son is alive, Lyra continued, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. The creature you fear, the Draconian, has never demanded human sacrifices. The original agreement was an exchange of knowledge, perverted by past councils to silence those who discovered truths they found inconvenient. Elder Voss stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. This is the delusion of a grieving mother, nothing more. Security, remove her before she causes further distress. Wait, Elder Faye interjected. Let her finish. What harm can come from listening? The harm of false hope, Elder Quan said, though his ancient eyes held something that might have been doubt. The harm of undermining traditions that have kept us safe for generations. Safe? Lyra laughed bitterly. You call it safety to live on borrowed time? To destroy the very world that sustains us? The Draconian tried to warn us through the fourth emissary, Petra Chen's sister, that our mining operations would eventually render this planet uninhabitable. Instead of heeding that warning, the council of that time discredited her and transformed a beneficial exchange into a brutal sacrifice. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some called for Lyra to be silenced, but others demanded she be allowed to continue. The divide was exactly what they had anticipated, doubt beginning to creep in, questions forming. At that precise moment, the perimeter alarms began to sound. Panic erupted as the massive form of Thalasser appeared on the horizon, moving rapidly toward the settlement. It's coming for us, someone screamed. The sacrifice wasn't enough. Security personnel rushed to defensive positions while civilians scattered, seeking shelter. Only a small group remained standing calmly in the square: Lyra, Thomas, Elder Faye, Dr. Reyes, and Petra Chen. The modified sensors allowed Thalasser to approach without triggering the colony's defensive systems. As the massive Draconian reached the boundary fence, gasps of terror turned to stunned silence as the colonists realized what, or rather who, accompanied the creature. Eli sat atop Thalasser's back, visible to all, very much alive. The security team held their weapons ready but didn't fire, too shocked by the sight. Thalasser halted at the edge of the settlement, lowering his body so Eli could dismount. The boy walked forward alone, crossing the boundary into the colony, his white ceremonial robes still visible beneath the practical clothing Thalasser had provided. People of Havenvale, Eli called out, his young voice somehow carrying authority beyond his years. I'm not dead. I was not sacrificed. Everything you've been told about the Draconian is wrong. The crowd parted as he walked toward the central square, some reaching out to touch him as if to confirm he was real. His parents rushed forward, embracing him briefly before standing protectively at his sides as he approached the council platform. Impossible, Elder Voss whispered, his face ashen. An illusion, another council member insisted. A trick of the monster. Eli climbed the steps to stand before them, unafraid. No trick, no illusion, just truth, something that has been in short supply for 40 years. He turned to address the colony, now gathered in a hushed circle around the platform. The being you have feared is called Thalasser, last guardian of Kael'var. His kind lived on this world for 1,000,000 years before nearly losing it to a catastrophe. They saved what they could and established guardians to watch over its healing. Thalasser remained at the boundary, a massive but now curiously non-threatening presence. Some colonists had already begun to approach cautiously, their fear giving way to fascination. When our ancestors arrived, Eli continued, they encountered Thalasser and initially fought him, fearing what they didn't understand. But the First Council established a treaty, not for sacrifice, but for knowledge. Each year, one colonist would spend time in Kael'var, learning from the archives of draconian civilization, bringing back technologies and insights to help our settlement thrive. He pointed to the buildings around them. Our hydroponic systems, our atmospheric processors, our weather prediction models, all improved by knowledge gained from these exchanges. But the fourth emissary discovered something the council didn't want to hear, that our planned mining operations would eventually destroy this world's fragile ecosystem. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elder Quan stepped forward, his ancient face troubled. Boy, he said quietly, these are serious accusations. What proof can you offer beyond your word? Eli smiled. I thought you might ask that. He turned toward Thalasser and nodded. The Draconian responded with a mental projection so powerful that every colonist felt it. Not words, but images, flooding their minds with truth. They saw the history Eli had described, experienced fragments of the past through Thalasser's memories, witnessed the environmental projections showing their world's potential fate. When the projection ended, the silence was absolute. Then, slowly, voices began to rise, questions, exclamations, arguments erupting across the square. Silence, Elder Fei commanded, stepping forward. We have been shown truth that cannot be denied. The question now is what we do with it. Elder Voss recovered his composure, his face hardening. This changes nothing. We came to this world for its resources. Without mining, the colony cannot sustain its growth, cannot fulfill its purpose. That's where you're wrong, Eli countered. Thalasser has shown me technologies his people use to live here sustainably for eons. Ways to harness energy, grow food, build and create without destroying the planetary systems that keep us all alive. Dr. Reyes stepped forward, holding up a data tablet. I've already begun analyzing some of this knowledge Eli has shared. It's revolutionary. The energy systems alone could transform our colony. We wouldn't need mining. We'd have better alternatives. For the next hour, as the twin suns crossed the sky above them, the colony engaged in the most open discussion it had experienced in generations. Council members argued, colonists questioned, and through it all, Thalasser remained at the boundary, a living reminder of the world's true history. Eventually, Elder Quan raised his hands for silence. As the oldest council member, his voice carried special weight. I have served this colony for 60 years, he said, his voice wavering slightly. I was taught the sacrifice tradition by my predecessors, who learned it from theirs. I never questioned, and for that, I bear responsibility. He turned to face Eli. Young Harker, you have shown courage beyond measure. And you, Guardian, he addressed Thalasser directly, have shown patience with our kind that we perhaps did not deserve. The ancient elder bowed deeply toward the Draconian, a gesture that sent shockwaves through the watching colonists. On behalf of this council, I formally request a renewal of the original treaty. Not sacrifice, but exchange. Knowledge freely shared for mutual benefit. Not all council members nodded in agreement. Elder Voss and two others stood with arms crossed, faces set in stubborn resistance. But they were the minority now, as the colony's mood had shifted decisively. Thalasser's mental voice reached them all. The treaty may be renewed, but with conditions. The destructive mining must cease. Alternative methods must be adopted, and your young prince must be allowed to continue his education in Kael'var, not as a sacrifice, but as an emissary. The first true emissary in 40 years. Eli looked to his parents, questioning. Lyra smiled through tears of pride, and Thomas nodded encouragingly. I accept, Eli said firmly. But I won't be the only one. Others should come too, scientists, engineers, those who can best understand and implement what we learn. A wise suggestion, Thalasser agreed. The heart of Kael'var holds knowledge that could benefit both our peoples. It is time it was shared again. In the days that followed, the colony experienced turmoil as old beliefs were challenged and new possibilities emerged. Not everyone accepted the changes easily. Elder Voss and his supporters continued to argue for the original mining plans, warning of economic collapse without traditional resource extraction. But they found themselves increasingly isolated as Dr. Reyes and a team of the colony's brightest minds began working with the knowledge Eli had brought from Kael'var. Prototype energy systems based on draconian designs proved far more efficient than anything the colony had developed. Agricultural techniques inspired by the ancient civilization promised to triple food production without expanding farmland. 2 weeks after the assembly, a formal ceremony was held at the offering stone, now renamed the Exchange Marker. Elder Quan and Thalasser, representing their respective peoples, signed a new treaty witnessed by the entire colony. No longer would humans be sent as sacrifices. Instead, a continuous exchange of knowledge and cooperation would exist between Havenvale and Kael'var. Eli stood proudly beside his parents as the ceremony concluded, watching humans and the last Draconian beginning a new chapter together. That evening, as he prepared to return to Kael'var for continued study, this time with a proper research team accompanying him, his mother pulled him aside. "I've never been prouder," Lyra said, embracing him tightly. "You've changed everything, Eli. You've saved us from ourselves." Eli shook his head. "Not me alone. It took all of us, you and Dad for believing, Elder Faye and the others for standing with you, and Thalasser for his patience with humans despite everything we've done." Thomas joined them, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "What happens now? Will you stay in Kael'var permanently?" "No," Eli said with a smile. "I'll divide my time. Thalasser says there's a role for me as a bridge between our peoples. He calls it being an ambassador, though he still insists on calling me Prince when no one else is around." Lyra laughed, the sound lighter than Eli had heard in years. "Perhaps he sees something in you that the rest of us are just beginning to recognize." As the twin moons rose over Havenvale, casting their silvery light across the transformed colony, Eli looked toward Mount Tarsus. Its silhouette no longer seemed threatening but protective, a guardian watching over them all. From the shadows nearby, Thalasser observed the human family with all 6 eyes glowing softly. For the first time in 50,000 years, the last guardian of Kael'var felt something like hope for this damaged world. In the boy, this human prince who had faced fear with courage and deception with truth, he saw echoes of his own kind's better nature. Perhaps, Thalasser thought, sending the sentiment gently into Eli's mind, humanity might yet surprise the universe. And for a species as young as theirs, that was no small achievement. Eli smiled, hearing the unspoken thought, and turned to wave at the ancient being who had become his mentor and friend. Together, they would forge a new path, not just for one human colony or one draconian guardian, but for an entire world poised between destruction and renewal. In the end, they had sent a boy as a sacrifice, but a prince had returned, bringing truth, hope, and a future none of them could have imagined. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.